The ghost in the attic. The old Victorian house, with its gables and turrets, loomed over us as we pulled into the driveway. Its peeling paint and overgrown garden gave it a melancholic charm, a stark contrast to the cheerful bustle of the Halloween decorations adorning the neighboring houses. This was our new home. My daughter, Lily, with her wide, curious eyes, seemed unfazed by the house's imposing presence. "It looks like a castle, Mommy!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. Moving into the house on the eve of Halloween was less than ideal, but with the unexpected job offer, we had little choice. Unpacking was a blur of cardboard boxes and bubble wrap, the house echoing with the sounds of our hurried movements. By the time night fell, we were exhausted but settled. Lily, tucked into her new bed, was asleep in minutes. I, however, found sleep elusive. The old house creaked and groaned around me, the wind whistling through the gaps in the window frames. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of unpacking and exploring. The house was a labyrinth of rooms and corridors, each with its own peculiar charm. Lily was particularly fascinated by the attic, a dusty, cobweb-filled space that seemed to hold endless possibilities for her imaginative mind. She would spend hours up there, her laughter echoing through the house. One evening, I was startled by an unfamiliar sound from the attic. It was Lily's voice, but she wasn't alone. She was talking to someone, her voice filled with a playful lilt. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space. "I'm playing with Emily," she replied, her voice muffled by the distance. "Emily?" I asked, confused. "She's my new friend. She lives in the attic." My heart pounded in my chest. I knew there was no one else in the house. The attic door creaked open, and Lily emerged, her face flushed with excitement. "Emily says she wants to play hide and seek," she announced, her eyes sparkling. "Emily?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. "She's right behind me, Mommy. Can't you see her?" A chill ran down my spine. The attic door stood wide open, a gaping maw in the dim light. "Lily, there's no one there," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But Mommy, she's right here!" Lily insisted, pointing to the empty space beside her. I forced a smile, kneeling down to her level. "Sweetie, it's just your imagination. Let's go downstairs and have some hot chocolate." I took her hand and led her away from the attic, my mind racing. That night, I lay awake, listening to the house's symphony of creaks and groans. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. I couldn't shake the image of Lily talking to the empty air, her voice filled with such conviction. The next day, I decided to investigate the attic. Armed with a flashlight, I climbed the creaky stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The attic was as I remembered it, a dusty expanse of forgotten furniture and cobwebs. I scanned the room, searching for any sign of another presence. There was nothing. As I was about to leave, I noticed a small wooden doll tucked away in a corner. It was old and worn, its paint chipped and faded. I picked it up, examining it closely. There was something unsettling about it, a sense of sadness that seemed to emanate from its lifeless eyes. I returned downstairs, the doll clutched in my hand. Lily was playing in the living room, her laughter filling the house. I showed her the doll, but she just shook her head. "That's not Emily's," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "Emily has a much prettier doll." That night, I did some research on the house. It turned out it had a long and storied history, dating back to the 1800s. There had been several owners over the years, each with their own tales of strange occurrences and unexplained phenomena. But one story stood out, a chilling tale of a young girl named Emily who had tragically died in the house over a century ago. The story sent shivers down my spine. Emily had been playing in the attic when a fire broke out, trapping her inside. Her charred remains were found days later, clutched in the arms of a doll. I looked at the doll in my hand, a sense of dread washing over me. Was it possible that Lily was communicating with the spirit of the little girl who had died in the house all those years ago? And if so, what did she want? Halloween was fast approaching, and the town was abuzz with excitement. Children in costumes paraded the streets, their laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. But inside our old house, a sense of unease lingered. Lily's conversations with Emily became more frequent, their games more elaborate. I tried to distract her, to focus her attention on the upcoming festivities, but she was increasingly drawn to the attic and her invisible friend. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, I heard a crash from upstairs. My heart leapt into my throat. I rushed up the stairs, my mind filled with terrifying images. The attic door stood ajar, and the sound of childish laughter drifted down the hallway. I pushed the door open, my breath catching in my throat. The attic was in disarray, furniture overturned, boxes strewn across the floor. Lily stood in the middle of the chaos, her face flushed, her eyes wide with excitement. "We were just playing, Mommy," she exclaimed, her voice filled with a nervous energy. "Playing? Lily, look at this mess," I said, my voice sharp with worry. "But Emily got mad when I didn't want to play anymore," she whimpered, tears welling up in her eyes. "She said she'd make me play forever if I didn't listen to her." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I knelt down, taking Lily's trembling hands in mine. "Lily, listen to me. Emily isn't real. She's just in your imagination." "But she is real, Mommy," Lily insisted, her voice rising in panic. "She's right here." I looked around the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The attic was empty, but the air crackled with an unseen energy. I could feel it, a palpable presence that sent shivers down my spine. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, listening to the house's creaks and groans, my mind filled with dark thoughts. I knew I had to do something to protect Lily from whatever was happening in this house. The next morning, I called a local historian, hoping to learn more about Emily and the tragic fire that had claimed her life. He agreed to meet me at the house, his voice filled with a curious intrigue. As I waited for his arrival, I wandered through the house, my footsteps echoing in the empty rooms. I paused at the foot of the attic stairs, my hand hovering over the banister. A sense of dread washed over me, a premonition of something terrible lurking just beyond that door. The doorbell rang, shattering the silence. I took a deep breath and opened the door, my heart heavy with anticipation. The historian stood on the doorstep, his eyes filled with a knowing glint. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice grave, "I believe your house has a story to tell." The historian, Mr. Blackwood, was a tall, thin man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes. He entered the house with an air of quiet authority, his gaze sweeping over the antique furnishings and faded wallpaper. "This house," he began, his voice echoing in the silent hallway, "has seen its share of sorrow." He led me to the parlor, where a crackling fire cast dancing shadows on the walls. We sat down and he began to recount the tragic tale of Emily, the young girl who had perished in the attic fire. Emily was a lonely child, he explained, her parents often away on business. She spent most of her time in the attic, playing with her dolls and imagining a world of her own. His words painted a vivid picture of a solitary girl yearning for companionship in the dusty confines of the attic. It was a heartbreaking image, one that resonated deeply with my own fears for Lily. "The fire," Mr. Blackwood continued, "was a devastating blow to the community. Emily's parents were inconsolable, and the house was left abandoned for many years." He paused, his eyes meeting mine. "There have been whispers," he said, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial tone, "that Emily's spirit never left the house, that she still roams the attic searching for a playmate." A chill ran down my spine. I glanced towards the ceiling, imagining the unseen presence lurking above us. "I believe," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice firm, "that your daughter has become Emily's new playmate." His words hung in the air, heavy with a sense of foreboding. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "But what can I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Blackwood leaned forward, his eyes intense. "You must break the connection," he said. "You must convince your daughter that Emily is not real." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out an old, leather-bound book. "This," he said, handing it to me, "contains accounts of similar occurrences. It may offer some guidance." I took the book, its weight heavy in my hands. It was filled with handwritten accounts of hauntings and possessions, each story more chilling than the last. As Mr. Blackwood left, I sat alone in the parlor, the fire crackling in the hearth. I opened the book, its pages brittle with age. The stories within were a terrifying glimpse into the world of the supernatural, a world I had always dismissed as mere fantasy. But now, faced with the inexplicable events in my own home, I could no longer deny the possibility that something truly sinister was at play. The book Mr. Blackwood had given me was a chilling collection of ghost stories and paranormal encounters. I spent the rest of the day poring over its pages, my mind reeling from the tales of hauntings and possessions. As darkness fell, I found myself increasingly drawn to the attic, a morbid curiosity compelling me to confront the unseen presence that shared our home. Armed with a flashlight and a newfound sense of determination, I climbed the creaky stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The attic door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning me forward. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The attic was eerily silent, the only sound the gentle rustling of the wind outside. I swept my flashlight beam across the room, its light dancing over the dust-covered furniture and forgotten trinkets. In the corner, I noticed the old doll I had found earlier, its lifeless eyes seeming to follow my every move. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice trembling in the silence. There was no response, only the echo of my own voice reverberating through the empty space. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Emily, I know you're here," I said, my voice firmer now. "I know you're lonely, but you can't stay here. You need to move on." The air grew heavy, the temperature dropping several degrees. I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, as if someone was watching me. I turned around, my flashlight beam sweeping across the room. There, in the far corner, stood a figure shrouded in shadow. My heart leapt into my throat. The figure was small, child-sized, its outline barely discernible in the dim light. It stood motionless, its presence casting a long, ominous shadow across the floor. "Emily," I whispered again, my voice barely audible. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze fixed upon me, a cold, unwavering stare that sent shivers down my spine. I took a step back, my hand clutching the flashlight tightly. Suddenly, the figure darted forward, its movements swift and silent. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure stopped just inches from me, its face hidden in the shadows. I raised my flashlight, its beam illuminating the figure's face. It was a young girl, her features pale and gaunt, her eyes wide and vacant. Her lips parted, revealing a row of sharp, pointed teeth. A scream tore from my throat, echoing through the empty attic. The figure lunged towards me, its claws outstretched. I stumbled backward, tripping over a stack of boxes. The flashlight clattered to the floor, plunging the room into darkness. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure's ragged breathing, its presence closing in on me. I groped blindly for the door, my fingers brushing against the cold metal handle. Just as I was about to escape, a hand clamped down on my arm, its grip icy and unrelenting. I screamed again, struggling to break free. The figure pulled me back into the darkness, its laughter echoing through the attic. I awoke with a gasp, my body drenched in sweat. The attic was pitch black, the only sound my own ragged breathing. I fumbled for the flashlight, my fingers closing around its cool metal casing. I flicked it on, its beam cutting through the darkness. The attic was empty. The figure was gone. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaking. I rushed to the door, throwing it open and spilling into the hallway. The house was silent, the only light coming from the moon filtering through the windows. I made my way downstairs, my mind reeling. Had it all been a dream? A terrifying hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion? I found Lily asleep in her bed, her breathing slow and steady. I tucked her in, a wave of relief washing over me. She was safe. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something on her nightstand. It was the old doll, its lifeless eyes staring up at me. I picked it up, a sense of dread creeping into my heart. Had Lily brought it up from the attic? Or had something else placed it there? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move. I quickly left Lily's room, closing the door behind me. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fitful sleep and anxious wakefulness. I tossed and turned, haunted by the image of the ghostly girl in the attic. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to protect Lily, even if it meant confronting the supernatural. The next morning, I woke Lily early. "We're going on an adventure today," I announced, trying to sound cheerful. Lily's eyes lit up. "Where are we going, Mommy?" "We're going to visit a special place," I said, taking her hand. "A place where we can learn more about Emily." We drove to the local historical society, where I hoped to find more information about the tragic fire and the young girl who had perished within its flames. The librarian, a kind, elderly woman, led us to a quiet corner where she presented us with a stack of old newspapers and photographs. As we sifted through the brittle pages, a picture began to emerge. Emily had been a vibrant, imaginative child, her life cut short by a cruel twist of fate. The fire had been accidental, caused by a faulty oil lamp in the attic. Emily's parents had been devastated by her death, their grief compounded by the rumors of her restless spirit haunting the house. Lily listened intently as I read aloud from the articles, her eyes wide with a mix of sadness and fascination. When I finished, she looked up at me, her voice barely a whisper. "Emily was just a little girl like me," she said. "She didn't mean to scare you, Mommy." My heart ached for both Lily and the ghost of the little girl who had died so tragically. I knew I had to find a way to help them both find peace. But as Halloween night approached, a sense of unease settled over me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Halloween night arrived, casting an eerie glow over our old Victorian house. The neighborhood was alive with the sounds of trick-or-treaters, their laughter and excited chatter a stark contrast to the growing tension within our walls. Lily, dressed as a princess, was initially thrilled by the prospect of candy and costumes. However, as the evening wore on, her excitement waned, replaced by a quiet apprehension. She kept glancing towards the attic door, her smile faltering. "Mommy," she whispered, tugging at my sleeve, "Emily wants to play." My heart sank. I had hoped that our visit to the Historical Society would have eased Lily's connection to Emily, but it seemed the ghostly girl's hold on her was stronger than ever. "Lily, honey," I said, kneeling down to her level, "Emily isn't real. Remember what we learned today? She's just a story." Lily shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. "But she's here, Mommy. I can feel her." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I glanced towards the attic door, its darkness seeming to pulsate with an unseen energy. Suddenly, the doorbell rang, startling us both. Lily jumped, her eyes wide with fear. "It's okay, sweetie," I reassured her, forcing a smile. "It's probably just some trick-or-treaters." I opened the door to find a group of costumed children, their faces painted with ghoulish grins. "Trick or treat," they chorused, holding out their bags expectantly. I fumbled for the candy bowl, my mind racing. As I handed out the treats, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The children's laughter seemed hollow, their eyes vacant and lifeless. I closed the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to find Lily standing frozen in the hallway, her face pale. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They weren't real." I rushed to her side, my arms wrapping around her small frame. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "They were like Emily," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They were cold and empty." A wave of terror washed over me. I realized then that we were not alone in the house. The veil between the living and the dead had thinned, and the spirits of the past were walking among us. The lights flickered, plunging the house into darkness. I heard a creak from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps descending the stairs. Lily clung to me, her body shaking with fear. I knew then that we were in grave danger. The spirits were no longer content to merely observe us. They wanted something more. They wanted Lily. The darkness pressed in around us, a suffocating blanket of fear. I held Lily close, my heart thrumming in my chest like a trapped bird. The footsteps drew closer, each creak of the old floorboard sending a fresh wave of terror through me. Suddenly, the attic door flew open with a resounding crash, flooding the hallway with a pale, ethereal light. Silhouettes emerged from the darkness, their forms flickering and indistinct. I recognized the young girl at the front, her vacant eyes fixed on Lily. It was Emily, and she was not alone. "Lily," Emily's voice echoed through the hallway, a hollow whisper that chilled me to the bone. "Come play with us." Lily whimpered, burying her face in my shoulder. I held her tighter, my voice shaking as I spoke. "Emily," I pleaded, "please let her go. She doesn't belong here." Emily's spectral form floated closer, her eyes glowing with an eerie intensity. "But she's our friend," she insisted, her voice filled with a childlike petulance. "We just want to play." The other figures advanced, their forms shifting and swirling in the ghostly light. I felt a surge of desperation, a primal need to protect my child. "No," I cried, my voice echoing through the house. "She's not yours, she's mine." In that moment, something shifted. The air crackled with an unseen energy, and the house seemed to hold its breath. Then a voice, warm and familiar, cut through the silence. "Emily," it said, gentle but firm. "It's time to let go." I turned to see Mr. Blackwood standing at the bottom of the stairs, his figure bathed in the moonlight streaming through the window. He held an old, worn doll in his hands, its paint chipped and faded. It was the doll I had found in the attic. Emily's gaze fell upon the doll, a flicker of recognition passing over her spectral features. She reached out a translucent hand, her fingers brushing against the doll's worn fabric. "It's okay, Emily," Mr. Blackwood said softly. "You can rest now." A tear slid down Emily's cheek, leaving a shimmering trail in the air. She looked at Lily one last time, a wistful smile gracing her lips. Then, with a final sigh, she vanished, her form dissolving into the ethereal light. The other figures followed, their spectral forms fading into nothingness. The house fell silent, the only sound the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Lily clung to me, her body trembling. I held her close, my heart filled with gratitude. Mr. Blackwood approached us, his expression kind and reassuring. "It's over," he said. "They're finally at peace." He handed me the doll, its worn fabric warm to the touch. "Emily wanted you to have this," he explained. "She said to tell Lily that she'll always be her friend, even if she can't see her anymore." Tears welled up in my eyes. I hugged Mr. Blackwood, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for saving us." As we left the house that night, the weight of the past seemed to lift from our shoulders. The old Victorian house, once a source of fear and unease, now stood as a symbol of resilience and hope. We had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, our bond deepened by the shared experience. And as we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the attic window. A faint light flickered within, a final farewell from the ghost in the attic.